At first glance, Pleasant Acres might have appeared as the idyllic American suburb, immaculate lawns, perfectly trimmed hedges, and an undercurrent of well-manicured order enforced by the omnipresent Homeowners Association, HOA. But beneath this picture-perfect veneer lay a bubbling cauldron of suburban dissent, where every backyard was a potential battleground and every sizzle from a grill echoed the clarion call of rebellion. In this quiet cul-de-sac, the age-old battle between personal freedom and bureaucratic tyranny was about to be set ablaze, one juicy steak at a time. Meet John, the unlikely hero of our tale. John was no ordinary suburbanite. He was a man with a zest for life, a magnetic sense of humor, and an unabashed passion for barbecue. To John, grilling wasn't just a weekend hobby. It was an art form, a celebration of freedom, and, in many ways, an act of delicious defiance. Every time his grill ignited, it was as if he was sending a smoky message to the powers that be. I refuse to let your bland, over-regulated world dampen my spirit. With his trusty spatula in hand and a twinkle in his eye, John transformed his backyard into a veritable arena of culinary creativity, where the aroma of charred ribs and seared burgers danced on the summer breeze like a sweet, savory rebellion. John's better half, Emma, was the undisputed queen of the barbecue. Her culinary prowess was matched only by her warm smile and infectious enthusiasm. Together, they hosted elaborate feasts that drew neighbors from every corner of Pleasant Acres. For Emma, each barbecue was more than just a meal. It was a joyous communal celebration of life's pleasures. Plates piled high with sizzling meats and tangy sauces became a symbol of unity and defiance against the bland conformity imposed by the HOA. In a neighborhood where every detail was regulated, from the color of your garden gnome to the proper tilt of your mailbox, Emma's culinary extravaganzas were a riotous burst of life and flavor. However, not everyone in Pleasant Acres shared this passion for uninhibited indulgence. Enter Karen, the self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood's moral and dietary rectitude. With the precision of a drill sergeant and the conviction of a crusader, Karen patrolled the streets with one singular mission: to rid Pleasant Acres of what she considered the greatest public menace, meat. Clad in impeccably tailored, earth-toned outfits and armed with a stack of HOA memos, Karen's campaign against meat was as relentless as it was absurd. She was a vegan extremist in every sense, armed with the conviction that the mere act of grilling a steak was a transgression against both nature and the community's sacred bylaws. Karen's disdain for meat was legendary. She had transformed her life and her neighborhood into a battleground where every piece of smoked meat was a symbol of rebellion. With slogans like, "Meat is illegal," emblazoned on her hand-painted signs, Karen was determined to stamp out any hint of carnivorous celebration. Her mission was not just to enforce the rules, but to reshape the very soul of Pleasant Acres. Every time she caught a whiff of Emma's barbecue smoke wafting over the hedges, Karen's eyes would narrow, her jaw would tighten, and she'd set off on a crusade to impose her draconian vision of a meatless utopia. In this peculiar suburban microcosm, the clash of ideals was as inevitable as the setting sun. John, with his carefree spirit and devil-may-care attitude, saw each of Karen's tirades as nothing more than a minor hiccup, a humorous quirk of a system that was desperately in need of a little seasoning. To him, Karen's proclamations were as ludicrous as a vegan claiming bacon is the gateway to salvation. Every time a memo arrived in the mailbox, threatening fines for unauthorized meat emissions, John couldn't help but chuckle. He regarded these memos as nothing more than an invitation to throw an even grander, more defiant barbecue, a celebration of culinary freedom in the face of oppressive regulation. As the sun blazed overhead and the scent of marinades and smoked spices filled the air, the stage was set for an epic showdown. In Pleasant Acres, the backyard had become a symbol of liberty, a small corner of America where the spirit of independence was kept alive with each flip of a burger and every burst of laughter. John's backyard parties were a living, breathing testament to the belief that life was too short to be governed by outdated rules and stodgy regulations. Instead of bowing down to the tyranny of the HOA, John and Emma embraced their love for food with unabashed fervor, daring to remind their neighbors that sometimes, a little bit of rebellion is the secret ingredient to a happy life. But behind the laughter and the clinking of glasses, A storm was brewing. Karen's relentless crusade against meat was not just about enforcing rules. It was a battle for the soul of the community. Her public speeches, delivered with all the pomp and circumstance of a courtroom drama, painted a grim picture of a future overrun by carnage. A future where meat was not only illegal but morally reprehensible. With each declaration, Karen sharpened her resolve, determined to drive a wedge between the neighbors and silence the sizzling sound of grills forever. Yet, as absurd as Karen's mission might have seemed to the rest of the community, there was a strange charm to her fanaticism. Her dramatic flair and unwavering commitment provided the perfect foil to John's laid-back, good-natured defiance. In every neighborhood barbecue, as John meticulously tended to his grill and Emma artfully arranged platters of succulent delights, there was an unspoken challenge. A promise that no amount of vegan rhetoric or HOA decrees could ever extinguish the flames of true culinary passion. The battle lines were drawn, not in blood, but in barbecue sauce and smoldering coals, as two diametrically opposed visions of American life prepared to clash in a spectacle of flavor and satire. John's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and defiance. With every rumble of his grill, he felt as if he was reclaiming a small piece of freedom, a reminder that in this world, the joy of a well-cooked meal was worth fighting for. And so, as the first embers began to glow and the familiar sizzle of meat met the summer air, a quiet revolution was underway. In that moment, Pleasant Acres was no longer just a neighborhood. It was a battleground for the soul of America, where the right to enjoy life's simple pleasures was championed against the absurdity of overly strict rules and the fanatical zeal of one determined vegan. Little did Karen know that her war on meat was just the opening salvo in a much larger conflict. A conflict that would soon see the tides turn in the most unexpected and deliciously ironic fashion. For in the heart of every rebellious grill master beats the unyielding spirit of defiance, a spirit that, once ignited, could never be quenched. And so, as twilight descended on Pleasant Acres, the quiet murmur of a revolution began to rise. A symphony composed of sizzling grills, hearty laughter, and the unmistakable sound of rebellion against the tyranny of an HOA that had dared to dictate the flavors of freedom. John and Emma had secretly planned a backyard barbecue that promised to be a feast for the senses, a delicious escape from the rigid, meat-phobic rules enforced by the HOA. Under the dim glow of string lights and the soft hum of an old radio playing classic rock, the secret soiree buzzed with anticipation. Neighbors, undercover in their pajamas or disguised in casual attire, gathered like conspirators in the great culinary revolution. They chatted excitedly about secret recipes and covert culinary techniques, all while keeping a wary eye on the horizon for any sign of unwanted interference. As the evening wore on and the coals began to glow with a rebellious spark, an ominous silence descended upon the gathering. From the far side of the meticulously trimmed hedges came the unmistakable click of high-heeled shoes and the rustling of a crisp, unsmiling uniform. There stood Karen, the self-appointed food police, looking more like a militant bureaucrat than a neighborly watchdog. But this wasn't just any Karen moment. It was the prelude to chaos. In her hand, Karen brandished something truly outlandish, a homemade contraption that resembled a cross between a garden hose and a makeshift slingshot. Proudly, she announced to the stunned assembly, "No more shall this blatant lawlessness continue. Meat, in all its sinful glory, is illegal." With a dramatic flourish worthy of a Broadway finale, she loaded her weapon with what she dubbed tofu bullets. According to her, these were not just any tofu chunks. They were biologically enhanced anti-carnivore missiles designed to incapacitate any carnivorous celebration on site. The assembled guests exchanged bewildered glances. Some suppressed snickers behind their napkins, while others whispered incredulous remarks. "Tofu bullets? Really?" One neighbor muttered, half amused and half disgusted at the absurdity of it all. John's heart pounded as he watched Karen take aim, her eyes blazing with a mix of fanaticism and fervor. He could hardly believe that the ever-pious Karen had decided that the only way to enforce her bizarre anti-meat decree was to resort to violence. The fateful moment came swiftly. With the precision of a mad scientist on a crusade, Karen pulled the trigger. Out shot a surprisingly aerodynamic tofu bullet, soaring through the warm night air like a misguided missile. Instead of striking its intended target, a strategically placed inflatable vegetable display designed to serve as a symbolic scapegoat for meat consumption. The tofu bullet found its mark in an entirely unforeseen manner. It ricocheted off a metal barbecue tool and, in a twist of grim comedic fate, struck Emma squarely on her forearm. A collective gasp rose from the crowd as Emma stumbled back, clutching her injured arm with a mix of shock and disbelief. The gentle hum of the party was replaced by a cacophony of panicked chatter and a few irreverent chuckles. John's expression transformed from shock to a simmering rage mixed with a wry, ironic amusement at the surreal turn of events. Well, he thought bitterly, this really takes the stake out of meet the enemy. Karen, unfazed by the unintended collateral damage, immediately declared the barbecue an act of illegal culinary insurrection. Standing tall like a self-righteous sergeant on the front lines, she proclaimed, "I am the guardian of healthy lifestyles, and this is an affront to public decency. I shall not stand idly by while you revel in this decadent crime." Her voice, tinged with both hysteria and conviction, echoed off the manicured hedges, further intensifying the absurdity of the scene. The neighborhood's reaction was nothing short of explosive. Some residents, having watched the entire spectacle from behind their windows, couldn't help but laugh uproariously at the sheer ridiculousness of Karen's militant crusade. Social media was soon ablaze with live updates, memes, and satirical hashtags like #TofuTerror and #MeatlessMayhem. In cafes and diners across Pleasant Acres, patrons recounted the incident with incredulous amusement, debating whether Karen's bizarre attempt at culinary control was a genuine threat or merely a farcical stunt orchestrated by an overzealous zealot. Amid the chaos, John's mind was already whirring with plans for retribution. The humiliation of watching his beloved Emma, albeit slightly injured by a rogue tofu bullet, was the spark that ignited his inner rebel. He was not one to tolerate such absurdity quietly. That night, as paramedics discreetly treated Emma's minor wound, which, miraculously, turned out to be more theatrical than harmful, John began plotting his own brand of counter-campaign, one that would not only serve justice but also expose the ludicrous extremism of Karen's methods. The seeds of revenge were sown in the fertile soil of satirical defiance. John envisioned a future where every rebellious grill sizzle would be a retort to Karen's draconian rules, where the spirit of free culinary expression would triumph over anarchy masquerading as moral rectitude. In his mind, the tofu bullet was not just a projectile. It was a symbol of the absurd lengths to which fanaticism could go. It was a clarion call for the entire community to stand up against the overreach of authority, no matter how bizarrely it presented itself. Karen, for her part, doubled down on her claims. In a press conference held at the next HOA meeting, she wore a determined expression and a vest emblazoned with "Food Vigilante." With the gravity of a judge handing down a sentence, she detailed her rationale. If one tofu bullet can disable a single person, imagine the devastation if meat were allowed to run rampant in our community. This incident proves that our very way of life is under threat. Her speech was punctuated by exaggerated hand gestures and fervent declarations that left no doubt about her commitment to her cause. Yet, as Karen ranted on, the community's collective sense of humor turned her declarations into material for endless parody. Late-night talk shows began lampooning the incident, and local comedians crafted skits around the idea of a tofu arms race in Pleasant Acres. One particularly biting satirical piece even featured a mock trial where Karen was both the prosecutor and the defendant, charged with crimes against culinary decency. A performance that had the entire neighborhood in stitches. In the midst of the media circus and the uproarious parodies, John's resolve hardened. He realized that the only way to truly reclaim the spirit of freedom in Pleasant Acres was to transform his backyard into a stage for a counter-rebellion. A grand, unapologetically carnivorous celebration that would make even the most die-hard vegan skeptics raise an eyebrow. His mind teemed with ideas for a barbecue so audacious that it would not only honor the rebellious spirit of free eating but also serve as a symbolic smackdown against the absurd authoritarianism embodied by Karen. The night of the incident would go down in Pleasant Acres lore as a turning point, a moment when the absurd collided head-on with the inevitable drive for personal freedom. The tofu bullet, now infamous, had inadvertently lit the fuse of a revolution that would challenge the very notion of what it meant to live freely under the thumb of arbitrary rules. It was a call to arms for anyone who had ever been chastised for enjoying a simple, hearty meal, and it underscored the resilience of a community that refused to be cowed by the extremism of a single, misguided vigilante. As the neighborhood began to recover from the shock, and as Emma, ever the good sport, laughed off the incident with a resigned, "Well, that's one way to spice up the evening," John's eyes sparkled with the glint of righteous mischief. The stage was set, the players were in place, and the battle lines were drawn in the smoky haze of the barbecue pit. Karen's audacious act had backfired spectacularly, inadvertently uniting the community against the tyranny of enforced dietary ideology. In the days that followed, whispers of the Tofu incident became a rallying cry for those disenchanted with the HOA's overbearing regulations. Every grilled morsel, every aromatic plume of smoke from backyard barbecues, carried with it the promise of rebellion, a promise that the spirit of culinary freedom was far stronger than any self-proclaimed food enforcer. And as John meticulously planned his next move in the epic game of revenge, the neighborhood braced itself for what promised to be an all-out war of flavors, with satirical humor as the secret sauce that would bind them all together. The tofu bullet incident had ignited something in John. A simmering, sizzling flame of indignation mixed with just the right amount of irreverent humor. Determined not to let Karen's misguided crusade define the spirit of Pleasant Acres, John set his mind on an elaborate plan of culinary counterattack. This wasn't going to be a simple "I'm mad, so I'm mad" reaction. No, this was going to be a full-blown, covert operation that would see every backyard in the neighborhood transformed into a den of savory rebellion. And, of course, it would be peppered with just enough satire to leave everyone laughing, even as they tasted sweet victory. Late one balmy evening, as the moon cast a silvery glow over neatly trimmed lawns and manicured hedges, John began gathering his most trusted allies, fellow barbecue aficionados and freethinkers who refused to be muzzled by the HOA's absurd decrees. In hushed tones and behind closed garage doors, John laid out his master plan. With a mischievous glint in his eye, he explained how they would turn his own backyard into a clandestine barbecue haven. Invitations were whispered along the grapevine. "Meet at midnight. Bring your grill tools and your wits. Tonight, we fight tyranny with tongs." John's ragtag team quickly embraced their roles. There was Steve, the neighborhood handyman with a knack for repurposing everyday items into ingenious contraptions, like his spatula sword and tongs of justice. Billy, whose secret talent was marinating meats to perfection, promised to concoct sauces so irresistible they'd have even the most devout vegans weak at the knees. And then there was Lucy, the local prankster with a flair for disguises, tasked with creating humorous signage and decoys that would leave the overly serious Karen thoroughly confounded. John's plan was as audacious as it was delicious. Under the cover of darkness, they began setting up a secret rebellion barbecue, an underground feast that would serve as both a celebration of personal freedom and a pointed jab at the ridiculousness of the anti-meat diktats. The location, a seemingly innocuous, abandoned lot behind the community center that soon transformed into a hidden sanctuary for all things grilled and glorious. Every element of the party was designed with dual purposes: to revel in the joy of unfettered culinary expression and to deliver a satirical smackdown against the overzealous HOA enforcer. Gigantic banners were hung reading, "Down with Tofu Tyranny," and "Long Live the Sizzle," each sign dripping with cheeky humor and a blatant challenge to Karen's proclamations. John's team pulled out all the stops. Elaborate barbecue stations, complete with custom weapons fashioned from everyday grill tools, became symbols of their rebellion. Steve's spiked grill spatula and Billy's sauce cannon, a modified pressure sprayer that delivered a burst of tangy marinade, were not just tools for cooking. They were the very implements of a counter-revolution. The assembly of quirky gadgets and gadgets made it clear that this was more than a party. It was an act of defiant artistry. As preparations continued, John began to piece together snippets of information that would soon become the cornerstone of his masterstroke. Through a series of unguarded conversations and a few particularly clumsy eavesdropping moments, courtesy of Lucy's excellent sleeper agent disguised as a local newspaper reporter. John uncovered a scandalous secret. Karen, the self-righteous champion of a meatless utopia, harbored a clandestine passion for bacon. Yes, the very same bacon she publicly decried as the epitome of carnivorous sin. The revelation was pure poetic justice. Here was a woman who, by all outward appearances, could expound for hours about the evils of meat, yet secretly dreamed of crispy, savory strips of bacon. It was a delicious irony that would soon be exploited to its fullest potential. John couldn't help but chuckle at the notion. If Karen could barely resist the forbidden allure of bacon, then perhaps the key to her undoing was right under her nose. With the secret bacon obsession firmly in hand, John's mind raced with ideas. The underground barbecue needed a lure that even Karen couldn't ignore. Thus, the invitation for a special unveiling was discreetly sent out, not to Karen's door directly, but rather through a network of acquaintances who had inadvertently seen through her facade. The message was cryptic yet tantalizing. Tonight, witness the unveiling of the secret sauce that will revolutionize our taste buds. Prepare for a bacon revelation that will flip your world. It was impossible to ignore such a promise, and whispers soon spread that perhaps even the self-appointed food vigilante might have to attend. On the night of the event, the atmosphere was charged with an electric mix of excitement and mischief. Neighbors arrived in droves, each sporting humorous accessories like bacon-themed hats and aprons with slogans such as, "I'm with the Meat Rebellion." The clandestine lot had been transformed into an impromptu festival of flavors, where every station offered a defiant array of grilled delicacies. The smell of seared meat mingled with the sweet tang of secret sauces, creating an aroma that was nothing short of revolutionary. As the party reached its crescendo, John took center stage, quite literally standing atop an old wooden crate repurposed as a makeshift podium. With a microphone in one hand and a glistening spatula in the other, he addressed the gathering with a tone that was equal parts mock seriousness and exuberant glee. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice booming over the raucous clamor of satisfied bellies and playful banter. "Tonight we gather not just to grill, but to stand up for our right to savor the flavors of freedom. We are the defenders of deliciousness, the guardians of gastronomic joy. And mark my words, no tofu tyrant, no overzealous memos, no matter how vehemently they claim, can extinguish the fire of a true barbecue revolution." The crowd erupted into cheers, and for a moment, the entire space vibrated with the pulse of collective defiance. It was a scene so surreal and uproarious that even the strictest HOA rulebook might have cracked a smile if it could. Just then, as if on cue, a group of undercover operatives, neighbors in ridiculous costumes, no less, began parading through the crowd with trays of bacon-wrapped delights. The display was almost theatrical. A perfectly arranged platter of bacon, glistening under the floodlights, designed to evoke both hunger and scandal. The irony was palpable. Here was the evidence of Karen's unspoken love for the very thing she'd condemned in public. Whispers and laughter surged through the crowd as people marveled at the delicious subversion. The tension reached its zenith when, much to everyone's surprise, a familiar figure appeared at the fringes of the celebration. Clad in a meticulously pressed blouse and an air of stern indignation, Karen had come to observe, if not to intervene, then at least to witness what she likely assumed was the culmination of a misguided rebellion. The moment she stepped into the makeshift arena of grilled delights, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations hushed, eyes widened, and the scent of rebellion mingled with the aroma of sizzling bacon. John, ever the master of timing, saw his opportunity. With a playful grin, he strolled over to Karen, spatula in hand like a knight wielding his sword. "Ah, Karen," he quipped, his tone dripping with sardonic cheer. "Welcome to the grand unveiling of the secret sauce. I hear there's a special treat in store tonight. A revelation so exclusive that even the most devout meat reformers can't help but take a bite." Karen's eyes darted from the sumptuous bacon platter to John's confident smirk, and the room fell silent, waiting for her reaction. For a long, excruciating moment, she seemed to waver, caught between the duty of her convictions and the tantalizing aroma of the forbidden. Then, as if the sheer absurdity of the situation overwhelmed her, a murmur broke out among the crowd, a mix of laughter and incredulous applause. "Is that a hint of bacon?" someone shouted from the back, and the tension dissolved into a cacophony of mocking cheers. John continued, "We all know that a rebel's heart beats strongest when its taste buds are awakened. Tonight, we celebrate not just freedom, but the delicious irony that even our most fervent critics can't escape the allure of a well-cooked strip of bacon." As the revelry carried on, the underground barbecue transformed into a festival of defiant flavors and satirical banter. Neighbors took turns toasting marshmallows over open flames, sharing tales of past HOA grievances, and laughing uproariously at the absurdity of the regulations that had once seemed so oppressive. Every bite, every laugh, every sizzling sound was a tribute to personal freedom and the unyielding joy of culinary expression. John's ingenious counterstrike had become more than a mere act of revenge. It was a celebration of individuality and the unbreakable human spirit. His backyard rebellion, fueled by the spirit of satirical humor and a dash of sweet, savory retribution, reminded everyone that sometimes the best way to defeat tyranny is to meet it head-on with a spatula, a grill, and an unrelenting passion for life. And so, as the midnight hour approached and the stars winked knowingly overhead, Pleasant Acres found itself transformed. The stifling grip of bureaucratic absurdity had been loosened by a simple yet profound truth, that no matter how loud the decrees of a fanatic, the joy of a perfectly grilled steak, or a cleverly concealed strip of bacon, could always spark a revolution of flavor and laughter. John's underground barbecue was not just an act of rebellion. It was a manifesto of freedom, a clarion call to all who believed that life's pleasures were meant to be savored without apology. In that moment, the absurdity of the situation reached its peak, and even Karen's steely resolve began to crumble beneath the weight of irony. As the summer sun dipped below the horizon, Pleasant Acres transformed into a surreal coliseum of culinary defiance. The secret underground barbecue, once a modest act of rebellion, had mushroomed into a full-scale festival of meat and mirth, a gathering that would soon force the hand of the notoriously obstinate Karen and her HOA cronies. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation as neighbors, armed with spatulas and a burning desire for freedom, prepared for the ultimate showdown. John had long envisioned this moment as the crescendo of a delicious revolution, a chance to confront tyranny with nothing more than a grill, a healthy dose of humor, and the unyielding spirit of community. The stakes were as high as the billowing smoke from the myriad grills that dotted the once quiet cul-de-sac. Every sizzling rib, every perfectly charred burger was a deliberate act of rebellion against the draconian edicts of the HOA and, most importantly, against Karen, whose obsession with a meatless utopia had reached absurd proportions. The epic battle began as an explosion of sound and flavor. Neighbors, no longer content to be mere bystanders, joined forces to stage an audacious barbecue battle royale right in the heart of Pleasant Acres. Massive grills were fired up, their flames dancing like jubilant protesters. Laughter and cheeky slogans filled the air as residents brandished homemade signs proclaiming messages such as "Grill or be grilled" and "Meat, the only thing worth fighting for." The event wasn't just a feast. It was an outright spectacle, a direct challenge to the suffocating control of the HOA, and a perfect stage for John's long-awaited revenge. At the center of it all, John took his position behind a monumental grill, a custom contraption decked out with quirky modifications that looked more like the setup for a sci-fi cooking show than a mere backyard appliance. With a determined glint in his eye and a spatula that had seen more battles than a medieval knight's sword, he began the first round of his culinary counteroffensive. Every flip of a burger and every sizzle of a steak was accompanied by a wry, almost taunting smile directed at the ever-watchful Karen. And then, as if summoned by the sheer force of collective defiance, Karen herself arrived at the scene. Dressed in her signature power suit, her expression a blend of outrage and disbelief, she stepped into the midst of the carnivorous carnival. The sight of her, so rigid, so out of place amid the riotous celebration, sparked a wave of incredulous amusement among the revelers. It was as though she had stumbled into the wrong script, an unwilling actor in a farce she never agreed to audition for. Karen's arrival did nothing to dampen the spirits of the assembled crowd. In fact, it only added fuel to the fire of their rebellion. With every passing moment, the atmosphere grew thicker with a heady mix of anticipation and irony. John, ever the consummate showman, seized the opportunity to deliver a biting address that would soon become the stuff of neighborhood legend. "Ladies and gentlemen," he bellowed, his voice resonating over the din of sizzling grills and jubilant cheers. "Tonight isn't just about meat. It's about reclaiming our right to enjoy life's simple pleasures without being dictated by a fanatic in a power suit. We're here to prove that freedom, like a good steak, only gets better when it's well done." The crowd roared its approval, and even a few of Karen's staunch supporters in the HOA couldn't help but crack a smile at the absurdity of it all. But John wasn't finished. He had one final, ingenious twist up his sleeve, a plan so deliciously ironic that it would forever mark the downfall of Karen's meatless regime. Earlier, in a stroke of serendipitous espionage, John had uncovered Karen's closely guarded secret. Despite her public denunciations, Karen harbored an undeniable, almost scandalous, passion for bacon. This revelation was the golden ticket to deliver the final blow. Capitalizing on this juicy tidbit, John had orchestrated a secret sauce, a special blend of smoky, tangy flavors mixed with just a hint of extra heat, designed to be the ultimate symbol of carnivorous delight. At the peak of the celebration, as the crescendo of laughter and sizzling meat reached its apex, John announced the grand unveiling of his masterpiece. The crowd hushed in expectation. From a small, cleverly disguised cooler, he produced a vat of the mysterious secret barbecue sauce. Its aroma potent enough to make even the staunchest vegan weak at the knees. With a flourish, he declared, "This, my friends, is the sauce of liberation, an elixir that embodies our defiance against tyranny." With all eyes on him, John marched purposefully toward Karen. As she looked on, a mixture of dread and incredulity evident in her eyes, he proceeded to douse her in a generous, almost theatrical, splash of the secret sauce. In an instant, the mighty enforcer of meatless morality found herself covered in a sticky, flavorful reminder of the very thing she claimed to despise. The scene was both surreal and hysterical, a moment of pure, unadulterated poetic justice. For a long, charged moment, silence reigned. Then, as the absurdity of it all fully sank in, the crowd erupted in uproarious laughter. Karen, dripping in secret sauce, stood there in stunned humiliation, her carefully constructed persona crumbling before the eyes of a liberated community. The irony was not lost on anyone. The zealot who once proclaimed meat as the enemy was now the unwitting victim of her own paradox. The fallout was immediate and electrifying. The revelers, buoyed by their collective triumph, began a spontaneous celebration that swept through Pleasant Acres like wildfire. The underground barbecue had morphed into an all-out festival of culinary liberation. Neighbors danced in the glow of the setting sun, waving their utensils like banners of freedom. The once stifling shadow of the HOA dissolved in the face of such unabashed joy and defiance. In the days that followed, the repercussions of that fateful night rippled through the community. The local media could hardly keep up with the barrage of satirical headlines and viral social media posts. Memes of Karen's saucy debacle spread like wildfire, turning her from a fearsome enforcer into a comical cautionary tale of overzealous extremism. The incident forced the HOA to reevaluate its draconian policies. After all, how could one seriously govern a community where the spirit of freedom was so vividly embodied in the form of grilled meat and irreverent laughter? Karen, for her part, found herself increasingly isolated. Her rigid rules, once enforced with uncompromising zeal, began to crumble under the weight of public mockery and communal resistance. Even some of her closest allies in the HOA started questioning whether their strict regulations were worth the price of suppressing the simple pleasures of life. In an ironic twist of fate, the very movement she sought to control had rendered her authority laughable. The ban on meat was ultimately repealed, and the infamous incident came to symbolize not only the downfall of oppressive regulation but also the triumph of individuality and culinary passion. John's carefully plotted revenge had succeeded on every level. What began as a personal vendetta against an overbearing bureaucrat had blossomed into a full-scale cultural renaissance. An affirmation that personal freedom, spiced with a dash of humor and rebellion, was an unassailable right. The underground barbecue evolved into a recurring neighborhood festival, a jubilant reminder that no matter how high-handed the rules or how fervent the fanatic, the human spirit could never be tamed. In the final analysis, the epic showdown of Pleasant Acres was more than just a battle over barbecue. It was a triumph of irony, wit, and the unyielding desire to live life on one's own terms. John's ingenious counterstrike, punctuated by that fateful splash of secret sauce, served as a rallying cry to anyone who had ever felt oppressed by arbitrary authority. It was a celebration of the messy, delicious, and wonderfully unpredictable nature of freedom.